Hello, hello, and happy Wednesday! This week I'm in the mood to work on a little grid of minis. I love to do minis because they help me practice different mark making and how to work with the paint that ends up on my paper. So for this week's grid, I am going to work with blues. Mostly blues, and then once I'm done adding my paint, in the end I will of course add some gold. I'll also do some line work with my pens and see where I can take this. But right now I'm really focusing on adding my paint, and in this particular rectangle I'm just adding a very light wash of color. I'm going to try to work differently in each and every rectangle that's on my piece of paper. I sort of created a little bit of a frame around the different rectangles. I'd like to keep that intact, but we'll see as we go along how things work out. I did this type of experimentation in one of my previous videos a few months ago, I think now, or maybe a couple of months ago. And in that particular video, I was using 3 different colors, and what I did is I ended up mixing the colors to create new colors, and I really loved that experiment. It was a lot of fun, and I think it ended up being really beautiful. Well, I thought it was really beautiful in the end. And I especially loved the idea of just trying to apply my paint differently in each of the rectangles. But also it was just a really fun exercise to practice mark making. So that's why I wanted to repeat it in this week's video. It's something I do off camera, but I don't do it on camera very often. And I thought, well, why not record myself playing? So I said I was mostly going to be working with blues, and for the most part, I guess that is true, except I'm working with this turquoise, and it does have a bit more of a greenish tinge, but it is like a bluish green. So I'm gonna keep working with it. I do have a few different blues in my palette, but I want to work with the ones that seem to call my name the most, the ones that I feel drawn to using the most. And so that's why I decided to bring this turquoise in, even though it's not really purely a blue. But green and blue are very related. So I think it's okay for this painting. And yeah, it's important when we're painting, or when I'm painting anyway, that I use colors that I feel drawn to using, colors that I want to work with. If I'm sort of forcing myself to work with colors that I don't really like, not to say that that's impossible and that I might not change my mind about them, but I don't know, it's just less fun for me. I enjoy painting, and I love how I feel when I lay the paint down on my paper or on my canvas. And when I'm using colors that I really love, then it brings a lot more joy in the process for me. And so it's important that I work with colors I enjoy to work with. So after adding this bit of turquoise on the bottom part of my rectangle, I decided to just dip my brush after cleaning it on my paper towels. I just dipped it in water instead of going back into the paint. And as you can see, there's still pigment left on the brush, and so it's one way of carrying color into a painting in a less saturated way. And I love to do this a lot. I find it helps me with especially when I'm trying to create different values. And it's a neat thing to be able to practice blending the colors also together. So this whole entire project is going to be about practicing different skills. And I think it's pretty straightforward as I'm doing what I'm doing, but if there is anything in there that I do that you're not 100% sure what it was exactly that I was doing, please don't hesitate to ask. But hopefully just by watching me, you will see very clearly what it is that I'm doing. So for the most part, I'm using light washes of color. I might come in after this is all dry and add more pigment. But I'm practicing using my paint in different ways with different amounts of water in it. And I want to be able to create some different effects in each of the rectangles so that I can come in and look at the rectangle, each of the shapes, and feel inspired to create my lines when I pull out my pens. And oftentimes what guides my decision in my line work is what's already on the paper. And that comes from what I've done, but it also comes from how the paint dries on the paper. If there was salt added to the paint before it was dry, then that's going to create some different effects. And oftentimes it's those effects and those marks that are left on the paper are what help guide my decision-making process when it comes to adding some line work. I hope that makes sense. It's just how I work. I talk oftentimes about painting intuitively, and it really is a moment by moment process where one thing leads to the next thing. There isn't really a set plan for what I'm doing. And for me, that's a very freeing way of painting. It means that I can completely let go of holding on to the expectation of certain results, and I can just be free to create and learn and have fun along the way. And it is, for me, a lot more fun when I can let go and paint in this way. When I'm playing and experimenting with little minis in a grid like this one, I often will discover ways of using my paint and my other art supplies in ways that I will probably be inspired to use in another painting. And so it's not only fun to do this because it's a very freeing type of exercising to do, but it's just also an adventure in discovering how to use products in different ways can help us feel more inspiration when we are in the process of creating something. Oh, I wanted to say serious. Oh, I guess we could create things more seriously, quote unquote. That just doesn't seem very fun to me. So, I don't know. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with being serious. Don't get me wrong. I think I do have those moments myself. But for the most part, I like my creative process to be enjoyable, freeing, and relaxing. So the less serious I take the process and take myself, probably most importantly, usually the better it is. So it's all about playing and experimenting when it comes to creating these little minis. And if I do discover something that I might want to use in another painting later on, fantastic. If I don't, fantastic too. The whole idea is to just let loose, have fun, experiment, and see what I can discover along the way. Here I'm experimenting with my spray bottle and I'm trying to add a little bit of water to my paint while it's still wet so it moves around and kind of does its own thing. But of course, when you do that, you don't fully have control over what's going to happen. And sometimes that means it's going to do something that you weren't really intending to do. So not a problem. I'm coming in with a Q-tip and I'm trying to pick up some of that paint, and I can either leave it like that. I was sort of intending on leaving the frames around the rectangles white, but I could also do something else with that altogether. I haven't played with adding alcohol to my wet watercolor paint in a while, so I thought it would be fun to experiment with that in this little grid. It's neat to play with alcohol because when you apply it over paint that is still wet, it creates these interesting marks. And that's something that can also make an intuitive abstract painting really interesting. I was going to leave my grid lines in between my shapes white, but they sort of bled a little bit. The paint bled into the grid lines and I decided I wanted to cover it. In hindsight, I'll be very honest, I have a blue marker like this. This is a Zig dual tip marker. And I love working with them, and they come in blue and they come in black, and considering I was using blue in the whole entire thing, it probably would have been nicer for me to use blue. But hey, this is an experiment and I pulled out the black intuitively, so I'm just gonna go with it and it'll be fine. Ultimately, what matters most is what is in between the lines and not necessarily the lines themselves. So I'm just going to go with it and keep completing the grid and framing my little squares with this marker. So as I mentioned previously, not really digging this black. I do wish I had decided to use the blue marker instead, or maybe even just let the lines be white, even if some of the watercolor had seeped into the white. But, you know, it is what it is. That's what I decided to do, and I'm going to make it work the best I can. But I do think it would be nice, since I have black in the middle of my grid, to just create a black frame all around the piece, so that way it'll look a little bit more cohesive, and maybe, I think it's a big maybe. I'll like it a bit better when I'm done. It was lots of fun for me to create these little rectangles with my paint. I always love playing with watercolor. It's a very free and fluid type of medium, and I love working with it. But when it's all dry and I can start to play with my pens and add different marks, for me, oftentimes that's when it gets even more fun. And so I used my fountain pen to sort of delineate these two areas, and now I'm coming in with my fine tip pen and I'm just creating some very simple vertical lines, and yeah, I'm loving just the zen feeling of doing something like this. Nothing complicated, it's all very simple, and I think in many ways that's why it's so much more fun, because it's so simple. and gold, of course, look really, really nice together, so I had to pull out some gold to continue experimenting with my little rectangles. And this color in particular is called Classical Gold. It's from the CSY Gallery metallic set of golds, and I really love this little set. It's very inexpensive for these 6 little half pans, and really the colors are so nice and so brilliant, really like so shiny. I say brilliant. That's probably from French. I do think brilliant also means shiny in English, but anyway, brillant in French, brilliant in English. I don't know if it's got the same definition in English or not. I'll have to look that up. But when I say brilliant in this case, I do mean shiny. And yes, these little paints are very shiny and I love them. And so I thought they'd work really well in this painting, and yeah, they definitely do. So I called this whole piece a painting. I am not 100% sure it is a painting, but more so like a few little mini paintings all combined on one piece of paper. I think in order for it to be considered a painting, maybe they would have to be a little bit more cohesive. I feel like the black kind of throws everything off. I really wish I hadn't done that, but I did, and this is what I have to work with. But all of that considered, I will say this: I do like what's happening in each of the individual little rectangles. So even if I'm not 100% happy with the whole piece, I'm happy with the individual little minis, and that was the whole point of this exercise, was for me to experiment and try to create these little mini paintings, to experiment with new ways of applying my paint, or maybe not necessarily completely new ways of applying my paint, but different ways of applying the paint and different ways of creating marks, and most importantly, or more so than anything else, different ways of using the paint and the marks together to create something different. And I think there's something different in each individual little mini, and I like them individually, and we'll see how I feel about them all as a whole in the end. But I think for the most part, it's really about what's going on in each individual little painting that for me feels exciting. The gold I've applied on my painting so far should be pretty dry at this point, but just in case it isn't completely dry, I've decided to put a little bit of paper towel over the paper to make sure that I don't smudge any of that paint that I just applied. It is also paint that is made with honey, and it has a bit of a thicker consistency, and usually when it's fully dry, it's not much of a problem in terms of spreading, but it can, especially when it's applied more thickly, it can smudge a little bit. So it's good to be aware of that. And especially if you are creating something that you intend to sell, it would be really important to make sure you use something to affix the watercolor completely to the paper. I like to use a fixative for that, and I've seen other methods online as well. I do think with this paint in particular, it would probably be better to use a fixative than to use wax or anything like that. But anyway, just something to keep in mind if you are using these paints and you're creating something that you have the intention to sell. Keeping in mind the importance of using a fixative when you're done with your work and before you send it off to your client. I love the addition of this gold, but it also felt like I needed to work with a little bit of magic green in this painting, considering it does have a bit of a greenish tinge to it. It does look really nice with blues, and this turquoise looks really, really cool with it. So I decided to add it. Was it necessarily? Probably not, but you know, when you're working with metallic paints, it's good to sort of experiment with that too, and to see if there are ways you can sort of keep things more simple. There is this tendency, or this, not a tendency, but maybe a desire to use a lot of these paints because they're so shiny and really cool looking, and sometimes it can be very easy to go overboard with them. So using a little experiment like this is a good way to see how we can practice restraint. To see if, you know, we can sort of reel ourselves in when it comes to using the metallic paints. But hey, if you enjoy doing it, and I certainly enjoy using my metallic paints, go for it, especially in a painting like this. This is where well, I always think it's great to let loose and have fun, but in a painting like this especially, why not? You know, this is all about experimentation. It's all about play. It's about discovery, and there's no better way to discover how to do something or how to make something work than to actually try it. They say time flies when you're having fun, and certainly it's proven to be true when I'm painting. I just do not see where the time goes when I'm painting, and this little experimentation and play session has been especially fun, and it seems like the time just flew by. And now I'm ready to take the tape off the paper and moving closer to have a look at all those little details that I've created. These little minis really are a feast for my senses, and I love that on one sheet of paper I can create multiple little paintings and have so much fun creating each and every individual painting, and they are all different, and I don't know, there's something really satisfying about that. Not only is it satisfying to be able to create something different, but it's satisfying to also be able to move fluidly in a process and let every single instant inspire the next one. I love that about intuitive painting. Is this the kind of exercise you enjoy doing? Or are there any other fun ways you love to practice your watercolor techniques and skills? Let me know in the comments. I'd really love to hear from you. Thank you for making the time to join me on my creative journey. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating!